Hi, I'm Jessica Baptiste, and I will be presenting on Chapter 3, University Transformation as the Nation Industrializes, from 1870 to 1944. So here are some highlights that will be covered in this chapter. The Civil War was one of the most notable events marking the onset of the university transformation era. So this took place prior to the era, but it had a huge impact on the transformation era. Also, the College Land Grant or the Morrill Act and the Servicemen's Readjustment Act were both pieces of legislation that Congress passed that helped to shape the face of higher education. One provided more public institutions because of the Land Grant Act, and the Servicemen's Readjustment Act was able to usher in the mass higher education movement. So in the coming slides, we will look at the following elements in the transformation era: institutions, students, faculty, finance, curriculum, governance, and outcomes, and how these are all highlighted in the transformation era and what they look like during the era. So the societal context at this time. The conditions surrounding the American higher education in the university transformation era. There are many things going on in the country prior to and during this time, including the conflict between the North and the South, which eventually led to the Civil War. Then there was also the relationship between the states and the federal government, which wasn't clear at the time because of the way it was written in the Constitution. Also, the United States had a lot of expansion going on, and so subsequently the population increased. Then we also had the Industrial Revolution, which led to, of course, more jobs for individuals, but it also led to excesses in profiteering, which led to governmental regulations. Then the Emancipation Proclamation was passed and slavery was ended. So then there was Reconstruction in the South. But prior to the Civil War, colleges were small and not essential for problem solving. So they were mostly, um, religious institutions at that time. But after 1870, the student population in college changed from 63,000 to 1.5 million. So that era saw a huge increase in students going to college. So a look at the institutions during the transformational era. Many changes were needed before colleges could become universities. So these were some of the changes that were made for universities to become as we know them now. First, there needed to be a reduction in involvement with religion, especially sectarianism. As I mentioned before, a lot of colleges had religious ties. Then there was also professional groups that needed to be formed. Also, colleges needed to adopt a service to the community role. So more efforts out in the community took place. Then they also needed to encourage or at least allow professionalized faculty to form. Prior to that, they had not been very professionalized and the faculty was considered tutors. Also, there needed to be a value for research and the advancement of knowledge as an end in themselves. Then they needed to elevate farming, mechanics, and industry to areas worthy of study, which was important to our economy at the time. They also needed to exalt science over the humanities. In addition, they needed to change their mindset from a traditional mindset to knowing that knowledge was ever evolving. Then they needed to expand beyond a 4-year program to include graduate schools and advanced degrees, doctoral degrees. Also, there needed to be sizable funds at the ready to support these efforts. So what ended up happening during this time was a lot of imitation. Universities that formed, others imitated what they saw in terms of mission and rules and policies and procedures. So it led to competition and similar styles of universities. And then also the main contribution from these universities was scientific research, both in quality and variety. So not only were there universities during the Transformation era, there were other institutions that were around at the time who did not grow in size as some of the elite universities like Harvard and Princeton at that time. So these institutions, they had a high growth in broad undergraduate curriculum and public service involvement. They also served students who other universities would not or could not serve, such as the universities that served African Americans, called historically black colleges or universities. Also, women's colleges blossomed at this time, and then there were junior colleges who prepared students for collegiate studies or immediate employment, but they were originally designed to just be a 2-year program leading into a 4-year institution. Then there were also state colleges and normal schools, which were the teaching colleges of the day, and other colleges such as vocational schools accounted for 13% of colleges in 1897. So what were the students like during this era? At the beginning of the era, only 2% of 18-year-olds were entering college. By 1940, 16% were matriculating. 1920 saw the greatest gains. The belief that education could serve as a means to advance from lower to upper class was growing steadily. Then also with students, the admission criteria began to broaden. Academic merit was still always at the top of the list, but in the 1920s and 1930s, elite Eastern institutions adopted admissions criteria that depended on more than academic merit, such as recommendation letters and different other types of criteria to weed out certain students. Then also in the 1920s, there became the Scholastic Aptitude Test was developed and other standardized tests for college admission. And then in the 1930s, the graduate record examination was installed. So then at this time, the collegiate way also developed, which is just people seeing college as a way of life. And then we also saw the residential life and extracurricular activities taking form, intercollegiate athletics blossom. College was a place for socializing and also being socialized. Students also started to take part in social issues such as the women's suffrage movement, the coal mine strike, prohibition, the communist movement, and then the Great Depression made students really sober up when they realized they would not have a job at the ready as they expected. So the faculty during the Transformation era. At the beginning of the era, faculty evolved from tutors to professors, as I stated earlier, and they also began to pay faculty a bit more. Professors sought reduced teaching hours, different things that we're used to seeing that professors enjoy now started to come about, like sabbatical leaves that began in 1880 at Harvard. In 1915, budgeted expenses related to research came about. Then an increasing number of learned people took academic positions. So professionals who were out in the field started to take the academic positions that they were available. And in 1890, faculty formed departments along academic disciplinary lines. So this is when we start to see the university highly departmentalized because we have a professionalized faculty. Then in 1915, the American Association of University Professors was formed, and at this time, different issues surrounding academic freedom started to get attention. And so, with that, the American Association of University Professors published a statement of principle, which they addressed the academic freedom issue there. Faculty were appointed from among those who earned a doctoral degree at the same institution in those days. Also, the academic ranking dates from that time in the late 19th century. The rankings of associate professor, assistant professor, and so on was established at that time. And then in 1884, the University of California developed an entrance exam for undergraduates and criteria for accrediting high schools. So they began to start looking at the high school curriculum. So onward with curriculum. I just included this tweet. I thought it was a good quote about curriculum. It says, a strong curriculum brings clarity to a school's endeavor. It has practical, intellectual, and philosophical benefit. So the book defines curriculum as any set of courses, a summation of the syllabi, and activities of students and faculty members functioning in isolated units. So in the transformational era, there's different aspects of the curriculum that was highlighted. The breadth of the curriculum was broadened in several directions during this time. The elective system started to become popular, so moving away from just the traditional liberal arts curriculum, and so broadening it to an elective system. And then also a lot of vocational courses became popular as well. The faculty exerted force on the curriculum transformation since they were highly professionalized. Preparatory programs started to form during this time. First, the National Education Association, the Committee of 10, was formed in 1892 and proposed a model high school curriculum. So a lot of high schools were not on board with colleges being involved with their curriculum, but they did develop parallel tracks where some students would go on a track for collegiate studies and others would go on a track for employment after high school. But since a lot of high schools were not on board with changing their curriculum because of the colleges, the elite institutions in the East decided to just select students from private preparatory schools. Then there was also the centrifugal curriculum. So, as I stated earlier, the elective system became popular, but by the 1920s and 30s, people reacted against this and wanted a more generalized education. So again, with the collegiate experience, this became prominent where college was more than just an academic place where you earn a degree. It became, a culture, a way of life. There was connections students could be made on campus, and rituals and ceremonies became commonplace. Instruction at this time also broadened by having extended library hours. Group discussions became something that was common. Also, students finding and reporting on sources. And with the expansion of enrollment or the increasing enrollment numbers, group discussions really became popular as a way to manage the course load. Also, during this time, grade marks became established because before this, there would be just notes about the student's progress sent home. But now, as we see today, there are computing class ranks and grade point averages. So that started to spread during the transformational era. Also, by 1919, the American Council on Education spelled out the expectations for college. So this is when the accreditation boards became popular.